feel blessed to catch up with Marty and Debbie. We were just basically young married couples. Literally, I was married 2 weeks and met Marty. And so I was asking Marty, how do you do this? And he said, well, I've only been married a few months. So we kind of got together and tried to solve the problem. How do we, look after our wives and be the husbands that we need to be? And so we worked on Reno in Oklahoma City. He was down the road. I was at Office World. He was a mechanic down the road. And so we would get together at lunchtime and work out our strategies of how to look after our wives and how to work this thing called marriage. And I'm very blessed with Marty, because Marty and I would go off in studies and study with people, and it inspired me. When he went to Bear Valley, I went to South Pacific Bible College. I was so inspired by this guy. So wonderful to catch up, because it's actually been about 36 years since we've actually been together. So we feel very honoured. This is a story. This is a story about two guys. I don't know where Tim Lewis, some of you may know Tim Lewis from the North McCarthy. He kind of jumped in the middle on this one when he came to New Zealand recently. But this is a story about two guys that basically met the Lord, had a huge change and transition in doing that. And so this is the story that I want to fold to you today, and I want to talk about how Christ impacted us, changed us, affected us to go in a whole different direction. The word impact's an interesting word. It basically carries the idea of something or someone having a strong effect on another, so much so that they are changed forever. And really that's what happened with Andy and I. We were changed forever. I grew up on a sheep farm. There are my dogs. I actually had another 3 other dogs besides these ones. We had 2,500 sheep. We would move those sheep. We call it mustering sheep. Okay, and looked after sheep. My dogs love me. You can see them looking at me there. Each one of those dogs would work separately on a command. And a head shepherd, when I was going to talk to you in a moment, would run 15 dogs at a time. Incredible lifestyle. And so here are my dogs, my little Rocky at the front here down by my feet. He was a 3-legged dog. Okay, he got booted by a cattle beast we had and had to take his leg off, and he would work with those 3 legs. And so this was my upbringing. This is what I was doing. This is where we were going. In my family, we weren't Christians at all. My dad, we never talked about God too much. But, it's amazing how the scriptures talk about the fact in Matthew chapter 5, verse 45, that God causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he pours rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. And we were blessed despite, farming. Sheep farming is a prosperous business. We would have a holiday house by the lake, and we would have a holiday house by the ocean. We could choose which we wanted to go to in the summer, and we didn't take a week's holiday. We took 6 weeks' holiday. And so this was our upbringing. So we were basically farmers, and we were good farmers, and we were well known in the district. My father would have parties and put on parties and put them on for 150 people. And I would be out there ushering them into the field with all their cars and so forth. And this was the life that we were living. But it was devoid of God. And so one of the amazing things happened was that my father, when I was a young boy, would come into the bedroom at night and he would pray with me. Didn't do it with my siblings, just with me. And he would ask me, would you like to lead the Lord's Prayer? And I'd lead the Lord's Prayer. And then he'd ask me, Chris, would you like to pray? And I would pray to the Lord. And that faith, that development of seed about God and who God was started even at those early ages when I was just at primary school. And then I'd go to school. We had Bible in schools where one teacher would come in for 1 week, a Bible teacher, and teach us for 1 hour. And I'd get Bible in schools. And that also was implanted deep into my heart. Well, at the age of 13, my father said, you need to go to boarding school, a strict high-quality boarding school like I did and your brothers did, and I was petrified. This picture, you don't see it there, but I'm like, I don't want to go to boarding school. You know? Who wants to go to boarding school where you only see your parents twice a year? Where you'd get up in the morning and you had to do a 2-mile run, and then you had to stand in the cold shower while the prefects, the older boys, stood there and waited for you to freeze to death till they tell you to get out. Who wants to do that? It was a giant boot camp. And so I began to call on this God that I'd heard about from my Bible and schools teacher, and this God that my father had instilled in praying to, and I began to call on him to survive a boarding school. And so when I left boarding school, finally my dad said to me, son, he says, what do you want to do now that you've exited school? What do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a sheep farmer. This is where, that's what I was raised for. He says, all right, I'm going to send you to a station. It's like a large ranch, hill country station. You'll get your dogs and you'll have 2 horses, and that's what you're going to do. So he made a phone call, and there I was on this 9,500 station called Drysdale Station. There I am on the left there. I'm not sure I want these 2 guys looking after your sheep. You know what I mean? But here we are on the station, and this station is very steep. We'd get up at 3 in the morning. That was our mustering time, and we'd go out, snow, whatever the weather. We'd head out into the hills, into the station. And you can see the sheep here. This station has 70,000 sheep. And so we would begin this mustering, but I realized being on the station, it was remote. I didn't want this all my life. I thought, no, I'm a bit of a people's person, and sitting out there on my own on a horse all day, talking to no one except my dogs, you know what I mean? I thought there's got to be something better than this. So I left. I said, Dad, I'm packing up this farming deal. He was disappointed. And I moved to the city, and I became a salesman for Ford and later on Toyota. But in that process, I had a friend who I joined up with, and that guy there on the first picture, that Andy Taylor, because that's the story this is about also. We joined up and we thought, why don't we get a business together? And so why don't we get into the food industry? There's always good money in food if you do it right. And so we developed this restaurant, and this restaurant literally took off. We had them standing 4 deep on the pathway outside, lining up to come into our restaurant. And we were making so much money at 21 that we would, at home at night when we'd do the cash take, we would bring all this cash home and put these jars into these preserving jars. We'd stash the cash. And we'd put it into the ground in a row on a string line to make sure that we didn't lose the jars, you know what I mean? You could put them in the ground, you could lose them, but we would put the string line. And so we had these rows of cash at 21 years of age. And we thought, what are we going to do with all this? Because we don't want the Inland Revenue, or you'd say the IRS, trying to find you. So we thought, we've got to do something. We'll take a little trip. Let's take a holiday. And we didn't say, well, let's take a week. We took 3 years. 3 years. That's a holiday, isn't it? And we travelled the world, went to 36 different countries. And so the first port of call is we headed off on our trip. And by the way, here we are. I'm in the front there, the blue shirt. My friend behind me there. The first part of the trip, the first 18 months of coming to the US and Canada, we hitchhiked. And that's a whole other story. On the second part, I got a job way down on the Gulf of Mexico on St. Nicholas, a oil rig, and I earned pretty good money there. And so we earned this money, and we thought, let's buy a car now. And we bought this car in Galveston, Texas. And so the car at the bottom there is a big old LTD. One would sleep in the front seat, the other in the back seat. And so we journeyed. And as we're journeying, we've got to realize that as we were going, God was working. God was working in all this. And I have to say that, it says in Isaiah that God's word shall not return to him empty, but will accomplish what he desires. And those little planted seeds earlier on were being drawn in. God was drawing us to himself. In John chapter 6, verse 44, no one comes to the Father unless the Father who sent me draws them. And the word there is literally the idea of a boat being drawn into the dock. We were out at sea, flopping around, didn't know we were, but we were lost, and God was drawing us into the dock, little by little. And so as we travelled, we began to visit people. We travelled all around the US into Canada. Way at the top of the picture there, up in Alberta, Canada, we worked for a Pentecostal family. And we would get up in the morning at 4 in the morning and we'll milk the cows with them and do all this because I was farming and they liked the farming and worked their machinery and stuff. But, they would speak to us and they were a German family, so they spoke in German. We were left out of it. They'd have these devotionals and we were left out of it. And so one day we decided we want to go a little bit south to the Calgary Stampede and have a sort of we would say a wild weekend. And so we went south and we came back after the wild weekend and they locked us out of the house. They said, we don't want sinners in our house. And you could understand that because we were, a bunch of two heathens. But the problem was with that, that put us off. If this is Christianity, we don't want anything to do with it. But that built in Andy a hostility, built in me a curiosity. And so as we're traveling through Saskatchewan, I brought a Bible and I started reading this Bible and it started convicting me. I'd leave it in a brown paper bag, and as we came through the states, down through the bottom of the Bible Belt, I would visit different churches and all that, and I started to get this desire and hunger for what God was doing and saying in this word, and I started praying, God, lead me to where I need to be. I don't know where I need to be, but I need to be led somewhere. Please help me. And so we traveled through here, and as we got up into Colorado, we were chasing the ski bunnies as young guys were, and skiing and all that. And finally, I said, Andy, you know what? I'm reading my Bible, and this lifestyle that we have ain't in it. This ain't in it. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't know if we need to be doing all this. I'm starting to feel bad about this, And he said, well, you're going to ruin the party. And I said, well, okay, but, I've got, and it started to have this friction. And I'd keep my Bible in the brown paper bag hidden because I didn't want to offend him. And so finally I said, why don't we go through to California, start where we began, and let's do a little work down there. So we headed to California. We're coming up the 101 freeway, heading toward Ventura. We didn't know within hours of meeting Ventura that our lives would be impacted, changed forever. We landed there in Ventura and we've got the old cooker out and cooked up. I said, Andy, I'm going to find a church to go to. And he said, well, what am I going to do? You can drive around in the car for a while, while I go to a church. He wasn't too pleased with that. And so we drove around, pulled up outside, we got lost, came down a back street. Every church was closed, but this Anacapa Church of Christ. Pulled up and I said, I'll go and check if it's open. And I went on in there and I was greeted literally by 7 beautiful Californian girls, all single. I'm 23, okay, and I thought, well, this is pretty impressive. And Andy's in the car looking in like this, and he's about to drive off, but he sees the girls, and I go out to him, and these girls said, does he want to come in too? I wanted to say to him, he's a grumpy guy, you don't want him, But I went out and got him, and they were waving out to him. He locked up that car pretty fast, came on in, sat down and we didn't remember the sermon, but we remembered the love of this church because they walked across after that service to us. Bill Hybel writes a book, and it talks about basically walking across the room. And we've got to learn to walk across the room. We've got to learn to bring people into our lives because God's going to bring people into your life and you've got to walk across the room. You've got to get serious about who's God's going to bring into your life. And so these people walked across the room to us and they said, so good to have you here. So welcome. Now you've got to understand that this is what we look like. Okay? If we came in here with our suit and tie, I'm not sure we might have been ushered out the door. Might have been a bunch of hobos, you know what I mean? These, whatever we were. And we walked in that day into that building, and they received us. They said to us, let's go out for coffee in the evening, let's get an ice cream. So we all went out with the brethren. They said, we'll pay for you. And we sat there and they said, guys, we want to give you the keys. If you want to, we said, do you want to have it? Do you want to sleep at a house? And we said, no, the car's fine. One sleeps in the front seat, one in the back. And they said, well, why don't you use the building? We've got the building. And they slid the keys to us, this is 1979, here are the keys to the building, all the facilities are yours, use them as long as you want them. Now, they'd known us 2 hours. And so we said, well, that's wonderful. We thought, this is great. They said, stay around for a little bit. And so the next night, this is Monday now, Monday night, they had a study on, and it was on Ezekiel, and the preacher went through sunset. My good brother over here who used to teach at it, and he was there, and he says, listen, he says, we're going to study Ezekiel. And so we sat right at the back because we weren't too sure about this Ezekiel stuff. And somehow in the middle of this Ezekiel, he brings up baptism. And I thought, well, I'm going to go inquire about that because I was sort of, christened when I was 8 years old. Andy was christened when he was 8 years old. And I said, we've been baptized. He said, let's go and have a talk about that. So we went off down to the office with these 5 guys. I knew it was important then because 5 of them were following us, you know what I mean? I'd struck something. And so we go down to the office at 9 o'clock that night and 11 o'clock that night after they'd been gone through the Bible, some basic scriptures with us. They said, turned to me and they said, Chris, what are you going to do about this? And I said, I want to get baptized in Christ tonight. And they turned to Andy and I'm thinking, oh boy, this is over because Andy's going to go like this, you know what I mean, the other way, and I'm going to be, I thought, this is it. And he said, I want to get baptized into Christ tonight too. And so on March 28th, 1979, Andy Taylor and Chris Miller got baptized into Christ, impacted forever. And so they said to us, stay on here now for 3 months. Would you commit for 3 months? Just stay with us because, if you stay with us, we can ground you, we can disciple you, because if you don't, you'll fall away. Trust us. We did. And so we stayed there for the 3 months, and then they said, now it's time to go, guys. You need to carry on your travels. And so we hit our travels again, went off to Europe, brought this Volkswagen camper van. Now we're Christians. So everywhere we went, we'd hold Bible studies with people. Have them in there. We'd have a little table in there, set it up. We'd have our Bibles in there, and we'd invite people to come in and join us and study the Bible with us. Ended up baptizing a lady, met a lady in London in the Wimpy restaurant, baptized her, then baptized her family. And they went to the Bermondsey Church of Christ in South London. And so we would travel around Europe and we would go and do just evangelizing as we went. Transformed lives. And as we're coming through in a place called Limerick, way over here, I've got a little star over there because that's another moment in my life. I met a young lady. Her name was Melinda Howell. I've got to make sure I remember her, the old name, okay. Melinda Howell. She's married to David and Betty Ann Howell. They used to work in Wayne, Oklahoma, okay. And that was the daughter. And I met this young lady here, and here's the picture of her. Her name is Melinda. How it came about was they had a little small group that started in a new church plant, and she walked outside and there was a rose bush, and she got this blue coat, the puller, the belt, tied up in the rose bush, and she couldn't get out. She's trying to pull it out, so I went and got it undone, untwined it. 2 years later, we're married. Rose bushes will do that to you, you got to watch them. And so here we were, going off, and we got married in Lubbock, Texas, at Sunrise, a little congregation called Sunrise. And we moved to Oklahoma City. Didn't know much about this Oklahoma City part. Moved to Oklahoma City and went found the Cherokee Hills where, of course, Marty was, and that's where it all began. And then later on, what happened? Cherokee Hills sent us out again. And we've been 36 years now on the mission field. 36 years. What an impact. I want to share you just quickly here 5 things. I don't want to take your time, and I want 5 things from that, what we learned. Andy and I sat down and talked about this before we left, okay, before I came here. 5 things that I want you to see today. And that is, what was so impacting about this church was that they were open to divine appointments. They didn't see us as an intrusion into their lives. They saw us as somebody coming, believing that God brought us from New Zealand to come into and drive up that 101 freeway and be there at that building. They believed that God had done that, and they were open to the providential part of that, realizing that they were instruments in that. It says in the book of Proverbs in chapter 16 verse 9 that the mind of man plans the ways, but the Lord directs the steps. God is the master orchestrator, isn't He? He is this wonderful conductor that brings all things together. When you read the story of Ruth, and Abby has been reading this lately, and we've been talking about how Ruth was this Moabite, and how somehow she's in a foreign land, and here she is traveling and with the mother-in-law, and not sure what life's ahead, but she somehow, by the providence of God, God works, so she meets this rich man, Boaz. Isn't it an incredible story? The providence of God, God at work. And then you see the story of in John chapter 4, Jesus had to pass through, John chapter 4 verse 4, through Samaria, and meets this woman, and then meets the village. Providence of God. And you see Cornelius, how he says of Peter when he arrives, he said to him, this has been divinely directed by the holy angel. This is of God. God is at work, and we've just got to open up our eyes to God at work all around us. And as I start my day, as I head out, I say, God, today, you've got somebody in front of me, somebody's out there that you want me to meet and talk to. Don't let me not see it. I was on the plane here coming from LA to Dallas, and I'm traveling, and this guy was on his phone and beside me, and I've got to engage with this guy. Young exec, doing life, and 32 years old. His name is Isaac, but he didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time. And I said, Isaac, I like you. What's that app you have? More important, see. More important. Oh, he says, let me share it with you. And he came over and he's sharing it. And then he starts to have conversation. He says, I'm a manager of this, and we got into this. And I said, how's life doing? It's not doing that good. I said, yeah. And I said, it's a weird, and I just thought, I said, do you have God in your life? Is God? No. I'm a Greek Orthodox, he says. And then he turns around, he's picked up to see I was a Christian. He turns around, he said, I've got a whole lot of questions to ask God. I said, spit them out to me. Let's hear them. And so we began these questions, and he said, he says, I'm studying as a part-time course on psychology at the moment. I've never had this stuff. And I'm opening up his heart, and I said, and I wasn't giving him all the double barrel. I used to. I'd try and baptize him there on the plane somehow. I used to. I said, no. I'm just going to give him a little dab. So I just dabbed, and I just sat on one point. God loves you, Isaac. And by the way, this is a providential moment, isn't it? He went away that plane, he's looking back at me, and you know what I mean? He had a lot to think about. Sarah. I was up in Bangkok and preaching at the Song Church. They have an English class that preach. They said, would you come back and teach the class at the end of it? I said, sure, and I'm there, and these Filipinos, and they all understand English. Way at the back of the class is this lady, young lady, with a little boy. Finished the class, no one was talking, no one walked across the room. There's another one. I go to many places, no one walks across the room. I decided to walk across the room, and she said, Sarah, she's come a little bit timid, she said, I'm Sarah from Syria. I'm a Muslim. I'm a refugee. I had to leave here. My husband has tried to kill me, and I've had to come here because he's divorced me. And she said, well, I've come here to find out about Jesus. I said, you're in the right place. And so I went over and I said, stay here, Sarah. Stay here. I'm passing through, but I want to get somebody 4 weeks later, and Sarah's being baptized in Christ. Look at it. Look at her face. The providence of God at that appointed time, you see. And if that's not it, I was walking down the back road last year. I was walking down the street at 4 o'clock in the afternoon as I take a walk somewhere. I like to do a lot of playing with people and stuff. And I'm walking, and this car pulls up, and this couple leans out. No, we're just new in the area. Could you tell us where the playground is? I said, yeah, over there. Carried on walking. I saw, as I'm going up, about 20 minutes later, this car pulls into a house, and I thought, well, this is the couple. I'll go over and introduce myself. I'm Chris. Did you find a park? Yeah. I said, well, got a bit of a conversation, and next thing I somehow God got into it, as I try to do, and they said, well, we're kind of a little bit searching. I said, okay. And so I began, and I said, let's have a Bible study. 3 months later, then I'm baptized in Christ, but as he was walking back to his house, sorry. Your mic is off. Is it? I need to stand behind you. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. You probably got lost about 10 minutes ago back there. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, but anyway, cut a long story short, they got baptized into Christ. Providence of God. Appointed time. Some of you don't know, but I struggle with Lyme disease. Battle with it. Went to a clinic in Reno. And when I've got these tubes in me and I'm sitting there miserable thinking, what's life and where's God going to place me in the future? Where's this going? This guy comes up, he massages people in their pain, and he looks at me, and I've got my Bible and other people are in the room. He says, I'm a Jew. He says, I see you're reading your Bible. He says, try and convert me. I said, okay. I didn't want to do it because, to be honest with you, I didn't feel like having a Bible study in a clinic with tubes hanging out. Okay, that's all honesty. I said, no, I've got to surrender here to this. And so I began this Bible study over a period of 7 weeks. I'm there. And then in that room were 5 other people that were listening to me as well. And they, as well as this guy, went off, and we would go to the Foothills Church of Christ on Sundays where I'd preach. And he would come. And on the final Sunday, he says, Chris, I've got to obey the gospel. And so here he is, Greg, getting baptized into Christ. What was I there for? He wrote me and said this to me. He says, Chris, you came to the clinic to get well, but really you came to the clinic to make me well. Providential moment. God's marvelous at this, isn't he? God causes all things to work together for the good. That word there, to bring together, is the word synergism. It's like a nylon rope. If you have a nylon rope and you cut it, what does it do? It goes like this. And if you don't burn it off, you don't synergize it, it'll really go apart. God synergizes life. He's working with all those things that are out there right at this moment, bringing things together. And we're a part of that. And so somewhere out there's a Chris Miller that you may meet this week. Somewhere out there's a Glenn that you're going to meet this week. You just got to get your eyes open. Here's the second thing that I want to say, and that is this: they accepted us where we were at. We came in there looking like we'd stepped out of Woodstock. We came in there looking like this. I mean, I'm embarrassed with that picture, but that's what we were like. The stubby shorts that barely, as my daughter said, Dad, And that's where we were at. We came in there, and our desire probably wasn't for the things that we should have been. They were chasing, we were there for the girls. But God took us, these guys took us where we're at. Jesus took the woman at the well where she was at. She was from the wrong side of the river. She was not only from the wrong side of the river, she's a woman. And even the disciples are shocked that she's a woman. That he'd be talking to a woman. And not only that, but she was an immoral woman. She had 5 husbands. The guy she was living with wasn't a husband. Sort that one out. And if that wasn't bad enough, she's an ignorant woman. Because Jesus says of her, he says basically this: you do not know what you worship, nor where you should worship. She was ignorant. And if that wasn't bad enough, she was indifferent. John, in chapter 3, talks about Nicodemus. He wasn't indifferent. This woman was. And I want to tell you, I am in my journey with people are finding people basically immoral, indifferent, and very ignorant. That's the people that we're dealing with, and we've got to get on our game. We've got to start to realize that we've got to break through that. And it's a challenge for me and it's a challenge for you, but that's what we've got to do. Because if we're going to win this world, that's what it is about. Jesus took this woman where she's at, and we've got to take people where they're at. They took us where we're at. I want to put up this slide here. You notice this lady in the black here? Her name is Jazz. When I met Jazz, let me just say, her life was an absolute mess. I've been 7 years studying with Jazz. 7 long years. Not just getting them baptized. I get people that from over here, and I'll be honest with you, how many baptisms have you had? Honestly, is that the question? The question is, how many disciples are we making? How many people are we bringing along on the journey to the Lord, not just getting them in the water? We've got to start discipling people. She's 7 long years and is changing this woman. And what's amazing is this young lady over here on the far right, this one here, in the little blue, Kiwi came. I have a neighbourhood Bible study that it just rolls all the time. People come into it all, I just keep it rolling. This lady came in, this young lady came in, her name was Kiwi, and she liked the Bible, and next thing she's into it, all because of Jazz. 2 weeks ago, Jazz brought 15 people into our congregation. She's there, make sure you walk across the room, all right? She told the church, make sure when you walk across the room, because you know what? If visitors come in here, we need to be walking across the room. And so, what I'm saying is that we've got to be aware that there's these people that God is going to be bringing us. Here's the third thing that impacted us. They loved us unconditionally. Oh man, they came, here are these 3 guys, or 2 guys should I say, who walk in, looking like they did, but they accepted us where we were at, unconditionally. I'm a little embarrassed, as I said even yesterday, to tell this story, but after I was baptized, 2 weeks, I'm working on an oil site, and we were testing pipes, fractured pipes. There's this big old Mexican boy, this 240-pound Mexican boy. He was my boss. I got a little bit peeved off with him, and I slugged him. I hit him. Oh, look at me. And he went down in the mud. All the guys gather around. They go, this is fun. We've got a fight going on here. And he gets up and he charges at me with his 240 pounds, lands on me, and there's a board in the mud, and my head went down on the board, my nose blew open. I get up, there's blood everywhere. I'm like, whoa, what happened there, They cart me off. This is on the Wednesday to the hospital. This is the Wednesday. Wednesday night we have what? We have Bible study. Oh dear, and I've got to go, and I've got looking like I've just been hit by a bus. Go there, and there they are. What do they do with me? They love on me. I was expecting them to pull me aside, and I said, Chris, we need to have a little talk. They knew that I'd learnt. It says in the book of Peter, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because what? Love covers a multitude of sins. They covered me that day. And I want to tell you, when you baptize people that are ignorant and immoral, you're going to have a lot of fallbacks. You're going to have a lot you're going to have to work with. If you aren't going to stick with them through the journey for 7 years, they're not going to make it. They're not going to make it. And these brethren, stuck with us. And I can tell you other stories on this journey, but they stuck with us to get us where we are today. And we have to stick with people. We have to love them unconditionally. And then fourthly, I want to say this, very importantly, they gave us a very clear message. They would get with us, and when they taught us, it was clear. It was simple. We knew exactly what we needed to know. In the book of Colossians, it says this. Pray, Paul says, that God will open up a door for the word, so that we may speak forth the mystery of Christ, for which we have been imprisoned, that we may make it clear. Clear. Napoleon had 3 commands to his messages: be clear, be clear, be clear. I went on a Bible study the other day. A preacher down in another town said, I've got 3 studies on, and I'm studying with 3 of them. And he said, would you come and join me? I said, oh, well, that's fine. I'm normally the one that leads it, so it's a little harder. But no, I'll come in as a silent partner. And I sat there, and after 2 hours, these guys are just, woo! You could see in their faces, like, we've had enough of this. I mean, they wanted to be there, but there was just, he gave them both barrels. And his message was not clear. We've got to learn to have a clear message. We need to practice our message. We need to learn to give them simple. That guy on the plane, I just gave him one thing. I said, now, Chris, don't try and give him both barrels. It's in me to want to, get him and be baptized, but no, I want to just give him one message. I want to be as clear as I can. So be clear. And then lastly this, they taught us to pass it forward. In Matthew 28, we were delivered. They developed us, they equipped us, they got us color-coding our Bibles. They took us out on Bible studies, they taught us Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. They discipled us basically 3 nights a week to get us ready for the journey so that we could be deployed. And on the third month, they sent these 2 guys out. This is, by the way, our going party. This is the hobo party. This is where they sent us out. Put some money on the tree, put the cake on. Boys, you've got to go on. You've got to go. The word go in Matthew, when it says here, go and make disciples, it means to travel, to journey. Go on a journey, boys. And then, isn't that incredible? These guys loved us, but were willing to release us. And so they sent us on the journey. And so Melinda and I now have been basically on that journey for 36 years. 36 years of journeying together, doing this. I want to conclude. We have a national team, our All Blacks. They play rugby. Rugby's without the pads, all right? For some of you football boys. It's a pretty tough game. It's a hard game. We are number 1 for the last 8 years in the world. 150 countries play this game. We're number 1. Very proud of that. But the thing is with the All Blacks is, you see them huddling there? They huddle to get close. They huddle to get energy. They huddle to get encouragement. But they don't stay in the huddle. You get penalised like football if you stay in the huddle too long, don't you? And I want to say here, the game is won when we get up, take that ball like that guy on the other side here. When you take that ball and you run for the line. You've got to get across the line. You've got to get the touchdown. And I believe that's same with us. I'm enjoying the huddle here, okay? I'm enjoying seeing you guys. This is wonderful. I go and do this around the Pacific, and I enjoy getting encouragement from my brothers and sisters, and we huddle together and huddle together. We huddle on Wednesdays, and we huddle on Sundays, and we huddle. But you know what? We're not going to get the ball. We're not going to win the world if we do all this huddling all the time. We've got to get out. We've got to get the gospel out. I was reading about the church and the statistics recently. It's not good, is it? I don't want to finish with a bad note, but they say since 2009, 800 churches have closed their doors of the Church of Christ. And I go around and I notice that we're huddling more than ever. It's time to go out and run with the ball. And that Paul would say you've got a strain to do that. Go with me to the book of Colossians chapter 1 as we close. He says in Colossians chapter 1 verse 28, and this is a verse that is my verse, I claim, these 2 verses, all right, because this is what I try and do. We proclaim him. We proclaim him, and we admonish every man, and we present and teach every man with all what? Wisdom. It takes a lot of that. That we may present every man complete in Christ. Every man complete in Christ. And then he says this, for this purpose I also labor, striving, agonizing, according to his power which mightily works within me. It's time to get out of the huddle. It's time for us to get the gospel out and get serious about it. I don't know who's in here. I don't know where you are on your journey. Maybe you need to be delivered this morning. And that is it. You need to take that faith and enter the waters of baptism and be delivered. For some of us, we might need to be a little bit more developed. I find most of us are developed, but it's time to be deployed. It's time to get serious about getting the gospel out to those neighbours and to those friends and bringing up the conversation. I have people come up to me, how do you start a conversation? Just ask them about them. Ask them about the phone. I like that app. What's that app? Look for moorings, but get the gospel out, and God will work in that. Let's pray together. Oh, Father, we know that there's a world out there that you want us to reach. And you empower us through these times. You empower us to get together and get energized. These are our huddles, Father, and we cherish them. But we know, Father, that you've got more than that. You want us to reach people that are dying and going to hell and forever. And Father, they're suffering out there and they're fallen. And Father, you're in agony as you watch that, and we pass them by and we don't notice them because we're so busy with our lives and our affairs, and we simply haven't got it on our hearts sometimes. Wake us up, Father. Wake us up to the mission that we have. Wake us up to what we need to be doing so that this building could be packed and that we have to build another one in order to house them, Father. Help us, Father. Help us walk across the room today. Help us walk across the room next week. Help us to go across the room in our workplaces, in our clinics, or wherever they be. But Father, help us walk across the room in order that we may reach people. God, help us. And Father, we pray that if there's somebody in this room that needs to be delivered today in this room, I pray that they will come forward and do that so that we can equip them and basically employ them too. Father, help us with this. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.